In the heart of New York City on a chilly October evening, when the urban landscape shimmered under the glow of countless streetlights and the hum of distant traffic echoed through the concrete canyons, Gavin Turner, a self-made millionaire and CEO of an innovative tech firm located in the bustling financial district, found himself unexpectedly drawn into a moment that would alter the course of his life. Having just concluded a marathon day of high-stakes meetings in a sleek skyscraper near Wall Street, Gavin stepped out into the crisp air with little thought for anything beyond the next corporate challenge awaiting him. As he navigated the crowded sidewalks of Manhattan, his mind preoccupied with projections and profit margins, a small figure caught his attention near the busy intersection outside Grand Central Terminal. There, huddled on the pavement with an expression that mingled fear and determination, was a little girl clutching a worn backpack, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Compelled by an impulse he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge, Gavin approached the girl, whose timid gaze met his with a plea for help that transcended the usual indifference of city life. The girl, who introduced herself in a soft, trembling voice as Mia, explained that her mother, Caroline, was gravely ill and in desperate need of assistance. Each word Mia spoke was laced with a vulnerability that struck Gavin to his core, stirring memories of lost opportunities to connect on a human level amidst the relentless pace of his business-driven world. In that moment, the busy streets of New York and the clamor of everyday hustle faded into a distant backdrop, replaced by a singular focus on the child before him and the dire situation she described. Without hesitation, Gavin gently took Mia's small hand and reassured her with a warmth that belied his usual reserve, promising that he would help her reach the hospital where her mother awaited urgent care. The taxi ride that followed, weaving through the intricate maze of city streets, became an unexpected interlude of tender conversation and shared hope. As the vehicle sped past the luminous billboards of Times Square and the stately architecture of the Upper East Side, Mia recounted her brief but poignant memories of her mother's gentle smile and the soft hum of comforting lullabies, memories that were now shrouded in the uncertainty of an unknown future. Gavin listened intently, his own heart softening with every word, as he reflected on the often overlooked humanity behind every call for help. The journey to Mount Sinai Hospital, a renowned institution in Manhattan, was marked by an unspoken understanding that sometimes life presents us with crossroads where personal duty and destiny converge. Upon arriving at the hospital, the sterile corridors and the hurried pace of medical staff presented a stark contrast to the compassionate quiet that had enveloped the taxi. Gavin remained by Mia's side as she was hurriedly admitted into the emergency ward, ensuring that every necessary detail was attended to with precision and care. In the midst of beeping monitors and the rhythmic rush of nurses, he discreetly used his influence to expedite Caroline's admission and guarantee that she received immediate attention, his actions motivated not by a desire for public recognition but by an instinctive sense of responsibility that felt both profound and inexplicable. Standing in the softly lit waiting area, Gavin's mind churned with conflicting thoughts as he observed Mia's quiet courage and the palpable hope that flickered in her eyes despite the dire circumstances. He recalled the many moments in his life when business deals and strategic maneuvers had dominated his world, leaving little room for the unpredictable, fragile beauty of genuine human connection. Now, faced with the raw reality of a child's earnest plea and a mother's life hanging in the balance, he could not help but wonder if fate had orchestrated this encounter for reasons far beyond his comprehension. In that reflective silence, the cacophony of the city outside seemed to pause, as though even New York itself was holding its breath in anticipation of a resolution to this unexpected crisis. Gavin found himself grappling with a sense of vulnerability that was both new and unsettling, as the rigid structures of corporate success gave way to the tender, unpredictable rhythms of real life. The evening, which had begun as just another night filled with routine and responsibility, had transformed into a vivid tableau of compassion, courage, and the undeniable interconnectedness of human lives. Each passing moment in the hospital corridors deepened Gavin's resolve to be more than just a distant figure in a child's life, igniting within him a desire to confront not only the immediate emergency but also the hidden truths of his own past that had long been buried beneath the veneer of success. As he exchanged quiet words with the attending doctors and nurses, who moved with both dedication and urgency, Gavin couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was the prelude to something monumental, a change that would soon reveal itself in unexpected ways. The complexity of the situation, interwoven with hope and the weight of unsaid histories, pressed upon him with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. He resolved then and there that no matter how insulated he had become within the world of high finance and technological innovation, he would not allow the practicalities of his professional life to eclipse the raw, human need for connection and compassion. In that charged moment, as the neon lights of New York flickered against the backdrop of a darkening sky and the distant hum of the city melded with the solemn whispers of hospital staff, Gavin Turner embarked on a journey that would challenge his understanding of duty, destiny, and the hidden ties that bind people in ways he had never imagined. His unexpected act of kindness, sparked by the innocent plea of a little girl, marked the beginning of a change that would lead him to confront buried secrets and redefine his future. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The sterile white walls of Mount Sinai Hospital pulsed with urgency as doctors rushed Caroline into the intensive care unit. Gavin stood behind the glass partition with Mia by his side, watching in tense silence as nurses attached 4 drips and monitors, their movements swift and clinical. Mia gripped his hand tighter, her small fingers trembling. Despite the chaos, Gavin remained calm, his presence steady like an anchor. The little girl looked up at him with trusting eyes, eyes that mirrored something he couldn't quite place, something achingly familiar. He brushed the thought aside, focusing instead on her comfort. They had been in the waiting area for almost an hour now, and Gavin had already used his name, and the quiet power it carried, to ensure that Caroline received priority attention. But now that the initial flurry of activity was over, the weight of what was happening began to settle on his shoulders. A nurse named Grace finally approached them with a kind expression. She knelt in front of Mia and gently asked her a few questions, her full name, age, and whether she had any other family. Mia responded quietly, revealing that she was only 6 years old and that she and her mother had been living alone in a small rented apartment in the Bronx. Her voice cracked when she mentioned that her mother hadn't woken up all day and had been coughing blood in the morning. Gavin felt his chest tighten as he listened. It wasn't just illness, they had been alone, fighting something much bigger, something he hadn't yet understood. While Grace walked away with some paperwork, Gavin sat beside Mia and asked, "When was the last time you ate?" She shook her head slowly. "Yesterday. Mom gave me the last soup packet. She didn't eat anything." Gavin blinked hard, a lump rising in his throat. He motioned to a nearby vending machine, took Mia's hand again, and guided her to pick whatever she wanted. She stared at the rows of snacks, hesitant, as if even choosing something felt like a luxury. Finally, she picked a bag of crackers and a chocolate bar. Gavin bought extra snacks and a small bottle of orange juice, handing them to her like fragile treasure. Back in the waiting area, he sat with her on a bench, watching the night deepen outside the hospital's glass doors. For a moment he forgot who he was. The sharp lines of business meetings, the relentless chase for funding rounds, the pressure of being one of Forbes' top 40 under 40, none of it mattered now. Sitting there with a child who had more courage in her little heart than most adults he'd met in boardrooms, Gavin began to question how far he had drifted from the real world. Hours passed. A doctor in blue scrubs finally approached. He introduced himself as Dr. Khalid, a pulmonologist, and explained that Caroline had severe pneumonia that had gone untreated for too long. Her lungs were critically infected, and her body had gone into sepsis. Gavin's stomach dropped. He looked down at Mia, who had fallen asleep with her head on his arm, her face soft and peaceful despite everything. Dr. Khalid assured him that Caroline was receiving strong antibiotics and oxygen support, but the next 24 to 48 hours would be crucial. When Gavin asked about financial arrangements, the doctor hesitated, then said the hospital had already been notified that all bills were being covered by a Mr. Turner. Gavin nodded, brushing past the moment. As midnight neared, Gavin asked a nurse if there was a quiet room where Mia could rest. She guided them to a small family suite on the 3rd floor reserved for emergency cases. The couch folded into a makeshift bed, and Gavin gently placed a blanket over Mia as she slept, exhausted from the day's storm. He stood by the window staring out at the city that never slept, only tonight, it felt more distant than ever. He pulled out his phone and opened a text message draft to his assistant, Laura. He typed a brief note, "Cancel all meetings for tomorrow. I'm handling something urgent." Before sending, he hesitated. He'd never done this before, abandoning work, stepping away from the empire he'd built, but something told him this was exactly where he was meant to be. As the minutes stretched into hours, Gavin's mind wandered to Caroline. The name wasn't common, and the face he'd glimpsed under the oxygen mask stirred something from deep within, a memory blurred by time. He couldn't shake the feeling that he knew her from somewhere, that this wasn't just a random encounter. But when? Where? He had lived in Boston for most of his early career, then moved to San Francisco before settling in New York 3 years ago. The timeline didn't match unless it did. He frowned, rubbing his forehead, trying to force clarity from the fog of the past. Unable to rest, Gavin left the suite and walked back to the ICU. Caroline was unconscious, connected to machines that beeped in a steady rhythm. Her skin was pale, her body fragile. He stared at her face, trying to piece together the fragments of familiarity. Her nose, the curve of her chin, the soft lines of her jaw. There was something there. Something undeniable. He turned slowly and walked out, his thoughts tangled. The next morning, just as the sky began to pale with the first light, Mia stirred from sleep and called out softly, "Mr. Gavin?" He walked over and knelt beside her. "I'm here," he said. "Is Mom okay?" she asked, her eyes wide and afraid. He smiled gently. "She's fighting and she's very strong. Just like you." Mia nodded solemnly, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled drawing, herself holding hands with her mom, with a stick figure in a suit standing beside them. "That's you," she whispered. "You helped us, so I drew you in." Gavin looked at the drawing, stunned. A little stick figure in a suit. His heart clenched. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. Something deeper was unfolding, something that would force him to confront not only this girl's future but his own past. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Gavin sat on the edge of the hospital bed where Mia was curled up, her tiny fingers still clutching the corner of the blanket as she drifted back to sleep. The drawing she had shown him earlier was now folded neatly in his coat pocket, its innocent lines lingering in his mind. The sun had risen over Manhattan, casting a golden hue over the city skyline outside the hospital window, but inside his heart, a storm was brewing. He hadn't slept a minute. Thoughts kept chasing each other in circles. Caroline's pale face, Mia's familiar eyes, and the unanswered question that had begun to gnaw at him with terrifying urgency. Could she really be his daughter? Nearly a decade ago, before Gavin's life became a whirlwind of boardrooms, investors, and tech startups, there had been a summer in Boston that had changed him. He had just launched his first small business idea, working long hours and surviving off pizza and instant coffee. During that time, he had met Caroline at a local bookstore in Cambridge, not far from Harvard Square. She was working there part-time while studying creative writing. She was bright, kind, and had this quiet resilience about her that intrigued him. They had dated for about 6 months, an intense, beautiful stretch filled with late-night walks along the Charles River, shared dreams and quiet hopes. But Gavin's ambitions had pulled him westward, and when he got the chance to move to San Francisco for a major investment opportunity, he had taken it without looking back. Their goodbye had been hurried and awkward, with Caroline insisting she understood, and Gavin assuming she'd move on like he had. Now, standing in a hospital hallway 10 years later, all those memories resurfaced like waves crashing on the shore. He pulled out his phone and began searching her full name, Caroline Jenkins. He found nothing recent. No social media activity, no professional listings. Just an old blog linked to her name that hadn't been updated in years. He scrolled through old posts, reading snippets of poetry and journal-like reflections. One post from about 6 years ago stopped him cold. "Some things arrive when you least expect them. Like life. Like a heartbeat you didn't know you carried inside you." His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the phone. 6 years. Mia was 6 years old. If that timeline was right, Caroline might have been pregnant when he left for San Francisco. And she never told him. Did she try to reach him? Was she scared? Did she decide she was better off raising the child alone than asking for help from a man chasing fortune across the country? A wave of guilt swept over him. Had he been so obsessed with success that he'd missed out on the most important chapter of his own story? Later that morning, Dr. Khalid returned with an update. Caroline was still in critical condition but had shown small signs of stabilization. Gavin nodded silently but then pulled the doctor aside. "Can I ask something unusual?" he said hesitantly. Is there a way to find out if I might be the girl's father?" Dr. Khalid looked surprised but nodded. "It's not uncommon. We can do a non-invasive paternity test. It just requires a cheek swab from you and Mia. I can arrange it discreetly." Gavin agreed, and a quiet technician took the samples that afternoon while Mia watched cartoons in the waiting room. That night, Gavin didn't go home. He stayed at the hospital, pacing the halls and checking on Mia and Caroline. Mia had become more comfortable around him, asking him to read her a story before bed and smiling when he brought her a stuffed animal from the hospital gift shop. There was a warmth between them now that neither of them could name, but both felt deeply. When Gavin tucked her in, she whispered, "I hope you never leave." And for the first time in years, Gavin felt something anchor him in place. The next day, the hospital received the results. Dr. Khalid handed him the envelope in private. Gavin sat in a small consultation room, heart pounding, hands slightly clammy as he opened it. The words were clear. A 99.99% match. He was Mia's biological father. The paper slipped from his hands as he leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, tears stinging his eyes. A flood of emotions, shock, guilt, joy, sorrow, collided inside him. He had a daughter. He had a daughter. And he hadn't known. He had missed her first steps, her first words, every birthday, every skinned knee and late-night story. But he was here now. And he wasn't going anywhere. He walked straight to the ICU where Caroline was resting, her condition still fragile but no longer worsening. He sat by her bed and took her hand gently. "Caroline," he whispered, his voice thick. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes fluttered slightly, not yet ready to open, but it felt like maybe she heard him. "You didn't have to do it alone," he said, his voice cracking. "I should have been there. For you. For her." Over the next few days, Gavin did everything he could to make things right. He hired a private nurse to assist the hospital staff, brought in nutritious meals for Mia, and arranged for a child psychologist to help her process everything gently. He also called a family law attorney to begin formal steps toward guardianship, in case Caroline's recovery took longer than expected. But most importantly, he stayed, day and night, reading to Mia, talking to Caroline even when she couldn't respond. He wasn't just a CO anymore. He was a father. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The fourth morning at Mount Sinai Hospital began with a soft knock at the ICU door and the faint chirping of birds beyond the tall windows. Gavin had spent the night on the small couch beside Caroline's bed, a blanket draped over him, his legs cramped and stiff. Mia was sleeping peacefully in the adjacent room, watched over by a nurse. As he rubbed his eyes awake, he noticed something different. Caroline's hand had moved. A slight twitch at first, then her fingers curled faintly against the sheets. Gavin sprang to his feet and pressed the call button. Moments later, a nurse entered and checked her vitals, then smiled gently. "She's beginning to wake up," she said. "It's a good sign." An hour later, Caroline's eyes fluttered open, slowly, as if returning from a deep, distant place. Gavin leaned in, unsure if she would recognize him after all this time. She blinked at the light, then at his face, confusion settling in first, followed by slow recognition. "Gavin?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," he said softly, gripping her hand. "It's me. I'm here." Her eyes welled up. "Mia, where is she?" Gavin smiled, tears forming in his own eyes now. "She's safe. She's here. I've been taking care of her." Caroline closed her eyes again, but this time from relief, not pain. That evening, once the doctors confirmed that Caroline was stable and conscious, Gavin sat beside her, carefully choosing his words. He told her everything, how he'd stumbled upon Mia outside the hospital, how she'd asked for help, how he hadn't recognized Caroline until he saw her in the ER, and most importantly, how he now knew Mia was his daughter. Caroline turned her head away for a moment, shame flickering across her face. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice weak. "I wrote you letters, so many. But I didn't have your new address. Then I heard you moved to California. You were everywhere, news, interviews. I didn't think you'd want this, a child, a different life. I was scared to burden you." Gavin's throat tightened. "You wouldn't have been a burden. She's not a burden. She's everything." Caroline looked at him with tired eyes, but they were still the same, gentle, soulful, full of thought. "You've been with her these last few days?" Gavin nodded. "She's amazing. So smart. So brave. And funny. She told me she wants to be a veterinarian." Caroline gave a tired smile. "She loves animals. We have a cat back home. Named Pickles." They shared a soft laugh, one that felt familiar. Gavin realized in that moment how much he'd missed, how many nights Caroline must have sat with Mia when she was sick, how many school events she had attended alone, how many hard choices she had made without him. Over the next few days, as Caroline regained her strength, Gavin stayed close. Mia visited her mom every day after school, her joy bubbling over now that Caroline was awake. One afternoon, as the three of them sat together in the hospital room, Mia suddenly asked, "Mom, is Mr. Gavin my dad?" The room fell silent for a moment. Gavin looked to Caroline, who gave a small nod. He turned to Mia. "Yes," he said gently. "I'm your dad." Mia blinked in surprise. "Really? But, you didn't know?" Gavin pulled her onto his lap. "No, I didn't. But now I do. And I promise I'm never going anywhere again." Mia wrapped her arms around his neck tightly. "Does this mean I can call you Dad?" Gavin smiled, his voice breaking. "Yeah. I'd like that very much." As Caroline's condition improved, the hospital began making discharge plans. She would still need outpatient treatment and physical therapy, but she could go home in a week. Gavin offered to help in every way: medical expenses, therapy costs, even fixing up their small apartment in Queens. At first, Caroline hesitated, her pride resisting. But eventually she accepted his help, not just for herself but for Mia. One evening while they shared coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Caroline asked him quietly, "Do you ever regret not knowing about her earlier?" Gavin took a deep breath. "I regret not being there, yes. But I don't blame you. Life happened. We were young. I was selfish maybe. But I'm here now, and I'm going to make sure she never feels like she's missing anything again." As word of Gavin's involvement with Caroline and Mia reached the public, things got complicated. A few gossip blogs picked up on photos of him carrying Mia outside the hospital. Some speculated he had a secret child. Gavin's PR team called him in a panic, but for the first time he didn't care about image. He told them plainly, "This is my daughter. Let the world know. I'm not hiding her." The statement made headlines. Tech CEO Gavin Reed discovers secret daughter, read one headline. From billionaire to father overnight, read another. But Gavin stayed grounded. His focus was now on his daughter and her mother. The rest didn't matter. On Caroline's discharge day, Gavin personally drove her and Mia home. The apartment in Queens was modest but warm. Gavin had hired a contractor to repaint the walls, replace old fixtures, and even add a small desk for Mia. Pickles, the cat, meowed loudly the moment they stepped inside. Mia ran to her room, excited to show her dad her drawings and books. Caroline sat on the couch, exhausted but grateful. Gavin looked around the small living room, then at her. "You did all this alone," he said. "For 6 years." She nodded slowly. "It wasn't easy. But it was worth it." Gavin knelt beside her. "You're not alone anymore." That night, as Gavin prepared to head back to his penthouse in Midtown, Mia begged him to stay. "Please, just for tonight," she said. Caroline smiled from the kitchen. "You can take the couch. It's still yours from years ago." Gavin chuckled. "All right. One night." But deep down he knew, this was no longer a temporary stop. It was the beginning of something permanent. Something real. A family. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The air in Queens that Saturday morning carried the crisp scent of early spring, and the streets were still quiet as the city slowly stirred to life. Gavin stood in the small kitchen, awkwardly pouring cereal into a bowl for Mia, who sat cross-legged at the table with Pickles lounging in her lap. It had been nearly a week since Caroline came home from the hospital, and Gavin had barely left their side. He'd canceled meetings, postponed business deals, and handed over his CEO responsibilities to his most trusted executive at the tech company. For once, he wasn't making headlines because of a major acquisition or a market-shifting innovation. This time he was just learning how to be a father, and it was the most important thing he had ever done. Caroline, though still recovering, was moving around the apartment more each day. Her strength was returning slowly, but her resilience never wavered. That morning, she stood near the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea as she watched Gavin fumble with a carton of milk. "You're really struggling with that, huh?" she teased, a smile pulling at her lips. Gavin laughed, finally managing to open it. "Hey, I'm a fast learner," he said. "Give me a week and I'll be making pancakes from scratch." "With Mia's help, maybe," Caroline replied. Mia giggled and nodded. "He already burned toast once," she whispered. That day Gavin took them both out. They visited Central Park, where Mia ran across the open grass, chasing bubbles from a street performer. Gavin and Caroline walked slowly behind her, the sun casting long shadows. For a moment, Gavin glanced at Caroline and caught her looking at him, not with pain or sadness this time, but something gentler. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe hope. As they reached the Bethesda Terrace, Gavin paused. "I used to walk here every Sunday morning," he said. "When I first moved to the city. I always wondered what my life would look like in 10 years. Caroline turned to him. "Did it turn out the way you expected?" He shook his head. "No. It turned out lonelier than I thought. But this, being here with you and Mia, it feels like something I never even knew I was missing." Later that evening, back at the apartment, Gavin helped Mia with her homework while Caroline dozed off on the couch. It was a quiet, content moment, one he had never experienced before. Mia looked up from her math sheet and asked suddenly, "Do I look like you or Mom more?" Gavin tilted his head, studying her face. "You've got your mom's eyes," he said. "But that stubborn chin? That's all me." Mia grinned. "Good. Then I can say I got the smart part from both. Gavin smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You're way smarter than I was at your age. You're going to do great things. The next day brought unexpected tension. Gavin's office sent over a black SUV to pick him up for a board meeting he couldn't miss. He promised Mia he'd be back before dinner, but the meeting dragged on longer than expected. By the time he returned to Queens, it was almost 9. Caroline stood at the door, arms crossed. You promised, she said quietly. Gavin sighed. I know. I'm sorry. The board? You're not a part-time father, Gavin, she interrupted. She waited for you. She kept looking at the clock. She asked if you changed your mind. Her words hit him hard. He stepped inside, guilt washing over him. Mia was curled up on the couch with Pickles, her homework still open on the table. When she saw him, her face lit up, though her eyes were tired. You came back, she whispered. Gavin sat beside her. I'll always come back. I just need to learn how to balance everything. She leaned into him and he held her close. I'll get better at this, he promised. Over the next week, Gavin rearranged his entire schedule. He cut down his office hours, made remote work a norm, and even began mentoring from Caroline's living room while Mia painted beside him. It wasn't the world of luxury and sleek glass buildings he was used to, but it was honest, grounding, and real. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Caroline shared something unexpected. When I found out I was pregnant, she began softly, I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have family around, I didn't have money. But then one night I was walking past this old church in Brooklyn, and I heard someone inside singing. It was just a recording, but it said something like, You're not alone. There's always a way forward. That night, I decided I was going to raise her, no matter what. I just wish I could have told you sooner. Gavin reached across the table and held her hand. You did everything right, he said. You raised an amazing daughter. And I'm so proud of you. There was a pause, a long silence filled with mutual respect and something deeper, something they didn't dare name yet. That night, while tucking Mia into bed, Gavin sat by her side a little longer than usual. She looked at him sleepily. Are you going to stay with us forever? She asked. Gavin nodded. If you'll let me. She grinned, already drifting into sleep. Okay. But you have to learn how to make pancakes. As the lights dimmed and the apartment fell into silence, Gavin stood at the window watching the city lights in the distance. He was no longer just a CEO with a name in Forbes or a fortune in Silicon Valley. He was something far more valuable now. He was a father. And maybe, just maybe, he was getting a second chance at something he'd lost long ago. The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of the Queen's apartment, casting a soft glow over the small living room where Gavin sat at the coffee table, laptop open, papers spread out in an uncharacteristically chaotic manner. He wore a hoodie instead of his usual tailored suits, his hair uncombed, a clear sign that his priorities had shifted. Behind him, the sound of cartoon jingles played quietly on the TV as Mia lounged on the rug with Pickles. It had been almost 3 weeks since he re-entered Caroline's life, and in that time his world had flipped entirely. He no longer spent his days in the sleek high-rise of Midtown Manhattan but rather in a 2-bedroom apartment filled with coloring books, leftover soup containers, and the unmistakable scent of a home-cooked meal. Gavin was still a millionaire, still the face of one of the most successful tech startups in New York, but none of that mattered when he heard Mia's laugh or watched Caroline hum while folding laundry. This was the real world, and somehow, it made more sense than the polished illusion he had built around himself. That afternoon, Gavin had a virtual meeting with a group of international investors. He set up a makeshift office in Caroline's bedroom, balancing his laptop on a stack of books and using a table lamp as his lighting. As he pitched his upcoming AI initiative to a group of men in Dubai, he could hear Mia shouting from the hallway, Mom! Pickles ate my sock again, followed by Caroline's muffled laughter. Gavin muted himself and smiled. There was chaos here, yes, but it was a beautiful kind of chaos, filled with love and warmth, 2 things he hadn't realized were missing from his penthouse life. Later that day, Caroline took Mia to a local bookstore in Astoria while Gavin stayed behind to make dinner. He had been watching cooking videos on YouTube in a desperate attempt to impress Mia with homemade mac and cheese. As he fumbled with shredded cheddar and overcooked elbow pasta, he thought about how surreal it all was. Just a month ago, he'd been attending gala dinners with celebrities and shaking hands with venture capitalists at rooftop cocktail bars. Now he was trying not to burn butter. And strangely, he preferred this version of life. When the girls returned, Gavin proudly served them dinner. Mia gave the mac and cheese a polite, "It's good," before secretly feeding some to Pickles under the table. Caroline tried to stifle her laughter but ended up patting Gavin's hand in reassurance. "It's not bad," she said gently. "It just needs less salt. And maybe no mustard." Gavin blinked. The video said mustard adds depth. "It added something, all right," she teased. That evening they all snuggled on the couch under a thick blanket, watching an old animated movie. Caroline rested her head against Gavin's shoulder, and Mia nestled between them, one hand on Pickle's head. Gavin felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. And for once he was truly present. But as much as he cherished the quiet, warm evenings and the scent of lavender in Caroline's shampoo, Gavin knew the world outside hadn't stopped turning. The media had begun to ask questions. Where was Gavin Reed? Why hadn't he made a public appearance in weeks? Rumors swirled about illness, retirement, even bankruptcy. His board was patient, but only up to a point. The next morning, while Caroline walked Mia to school, Gavin took a call from his publicist. "You can't stay hidden forever, Gavin," she said. "People are beginning to think something's wrong." Gavin looked out the window watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes. "Something was wrong," he replied. "But now it's not. We need a plan," she pressed. "If you're taking a break, we announce it. If you're stepping down, we prepare a statement." He sighed. "I'm not stepping down. I just need more time." "Time doesn't wait, especially not in tech," she warned. "Sooner or later, someone will come looking for you." That night, he sat with Caroline at the small dining table after Mia had gone to bed. He told her everything, about the calls, the pressure, the whispers in boardrooms. Caroline listened without interrupting. When he was finished, she spoke softly. "You can't live in two worlds, Gavin. Sooner or later, you'll have to choose where you really belong." He looked at her, torn. "I belong with you. With Mia." "Then make it permanent," she said. "Don't just visit our world, be a part of it." The next morning, Gavin made a decision. He called his board and arranged for a press conference, not in a five-star hotel or a gleaming office lobby, but in a local community center in Queens. He wanted to show the world who he really was now. Not just a CEO. Not just a tech visionary. But a father. A man who had made mistakes but found his way back. And maybe if the world could accept that, he wouldn't have to choose between the two lives anymore. Maybe he could blend them into something real. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The day of the press conference dawned with a cloudy sky over Queens, and Gavin felt a quiet unease stir in his chest. He stood by the window, sipping black coffee, watching neighbors move about their morning routines. It had been years since he'd last addressed the public directly. Back when his startup had gone public on the Nasdaq and cameras had flashed in his face like a storm. But this would be different. There'd be no skyscrapers in the background, no flashy graphics or buzzwords. Today he would be speaking not as the tech mogul Gavin Reed, but as a man who had rediscovered his purpose in a modest neighborhood where no one cared about app valuations or investor meetings. Caroline walked into the room, holding Mia's tiny backpack in one hand. She smiled at him gently, sensing the nerves behind his calm face. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "And we're proud of you." Gavin reached for her hand and gave it a squeeze, nodding silently. Mia peeked from behind her mother, then ran over to hug him. "Are you gonna tell the world you're my daddy now?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. His heart clenched. "Not yet, sweet pea. But someday, very soon." The community center on 31st Avenue in Astoria was not used to hosting media events, but Gavin had insisted on keeping it real. No stage, no banners, just a circle of chairs, a few microphones, and a handful of journalists who had come out of curiosity more than anything else. The buzz was growing. Speculation was ripe. Was Gavin stepping down? Was there a scandal? The moment he entered the room, wearing a simple button-down shirt and no tie, reporters sat up straighter. Cameras were already rolling. He cleared his throat, smiled nervously, and began. "I know many of you are wondering where I've been. The truth is, I've been home." A hush fell over the room. "For the past month, I've spent time in Queens, away from the boardrooms, away from the headlines, and closer to something I'd forgotten. What it means to truly live. To listen. To care. To show up for someone who needs you." His voice trembled slightly. "I was so busy building my company, I didn't notice that I was losing parts of myself. And sometimes, it takes something small, but incredibly brave, to remind you of who you were meant to be." The journalists looked at each other, puzzled. "Is this a resignation?" one called out. Gavin shook his head. "No. I'm not stepping away. But I am stepping forward, with a new perspective and a new purpose. I will still lead my company, but I will do it with values that extend beyond profit margins. From now on we're investing more in people, real people. Healthcare, education, community tech programs. Starting right here in Queens. The room buzzed. Questions were thrown like darts, but Gavin didn't flinch. He answered every one of them with honesty, some even with humility. When the conference ended, there were no roaring applause, but a subtle shift in the air. This wasn't just another billionaire stunt. It was something rare, genuine. Outside, as the last journalist left, Gavin spotted a young woman waiting near the sidewalk. She was holding a faded picture of him, the kind taken at business events. "Mr. Reed?" she asked cautiously. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother took one of your tech scholarships last year. He's the first in our family to go to college." Gavin smiled, the words hitting deeper than any award he'd ever received. "That means more than you know," he said quietly. That night, back at the apartment, they celebrated with takeout Chinese and a movie marathon. Mia insisted on wearing a glittery crown and made Gavin one from folded construction paper. "Now you're the king of Queens," she declared proudly, and they all laughed. For once, Gavin didn't feel like he was performing or hiding, he felt real. Oh. And yet, in the back of his mind, something tugged at him. He still hadn't told Mia the truth. Caroline had asked him to wait until the time was right, but he felt the weight of it growing heavier with each passing day. He knew children didn't understand secrets in the same way adults did. For Mia, love was simple: you were either there or you weren't. And now he was there. But was it enough? The next few days brought an outpouring of support. Messages from friends, former colleagues, even strangers flooded his inbox. Some praised him for his courage, others asked how they could help. One message, however, stopped him cold. It was from a man named Phil, who had once worked with him in the early startup days in Brooklyn. Gavin saw the conference. "That girl. She reminds me of someone." Attached was a photo, Caroline from over a decade ago, standing beside Gavin during a pitch session in a dingy co-working space. She looked so young, so full of fire. Gavin stared at the image for a long time. Did Phil know? Could others piece it together? He closed his laptop and walked to the balcony. The city lights shimmered beyond the rooftops, but it was Mia's laughter coming from the hallway that grounded him. This secret he carried, he couldn't keep it buried much longer. Caroline joined him outside, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "People are starting to ask questions. They're connecting dots." She looked away. "Then maybe it's time to stop hiding." "Are you ready for that?" he asked. "To have the world know everything?" She sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've been ready for a long time. I was just waiting for you." Gavin turned to her, the gravity of her words anchoring him. This wasn't just about business or redemption anymore. This was about truth, family, and a little girl who deserved to know her story. Maybe the next chapter would be the hardest, but it would also be the most important. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The morning was unusually quiet in the apartment on 30th Avenue in Queens. Caroline moved around the kitchen, making pancakes shaped like stars just the way Mia liked them. But even the scent of butter and syrup couldn't mask the tension hanging in the air. Today was the day Gavin would tell Mia the truth, that he was her father. Caroline had held off for years, shielding her daughter from a truth that felt too complicated to explain. She had never expected Gavin to reappear in her life, let alone become the man who helped save it. And now he wasn't just saving lives, he was slowly stitching together the broken parts of hers. Mia was still in her pajamas, flipping through a coloring book at the kitchen table when Gavin walked in, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. He wasn't in his usual polished business look today. No designer shoes or sleek blazer. Just a plain gray hoodie and jeans, his hair a little tousled, like he hadn't slept much. Caroline gave him a quiet nod and left the room, trusting him with the moment. Gavin sat down next to Mia, gently touching the edge of her coloring book. "What you working on?" he asked. "A unicorn," she said brightly. "It's for Mommy. But I think I'll give it to you. Unicorns are strong and magical. You helped Mommy, so maybe you're magical too." Gavin laughed softly, his throat tightening. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me." She looked up at him with those big brown eyes so full of trust. "Mia," he began, unsure of how to do this without confusing or hurting her, "can I tell you a story? A real one?" She nodded. "Okay. So, there was once a man who worked all the time. He built a big company, made lots of money, and thought he was doing great things. But one day he realized he had lost someone very important, someone he never should have let go of." Mia tilted her head. "Like who?" Gavin smiled gently. "A woman named Caroline. And later he met a little girl who made him laugh, made him think and helped him remember what love feels like. That girl was you. Her eyes widened with curiosity. Me? Gavin reached for her hand, holding it gently. Yes, you. And there's something I need to tell you, sweetheart. Something very, very important. I didn't just help your mom because I wanted to. I helped her because I love her. And I love you too. Do you know why? She stared at him, waiting. Because I'm your dad, Mia. I always have been. The silence that followed was thick, and Gavin's heart beat so loudly it felt like thunder in his ears. Mia blinked, the words processing slowly in her small mind. You mean, you're my real dad? He nodded. Yes. I didn't know before, but now I do. And I want to be here for you every day if you'll let me. She looked down at her lap, then up again. Does mommy know? She's known all along. She just didn't want to tell you until the time was right. Mia didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood up and wrapped her arms around Gavin's neck in a way that said more than words ever could. Okay, she whispered. I'm glad it's you. Gavin held her, blinking back tears. For the first time in years he felt whole. Later that afternoon the three of them walked together through Astoria Park. The air smelled of fresh grass and hot dog stands. Mia skipped ahead, chasing bubbles blown by street vendors while Gavin and Caroline followed behind. That went better than I expected, he said, exhaling. Caroline nodded. She's stronger than both of us. Do you think we can do this? He asked, his voice almost hesitant. Not just the parenting but everything? You and me? She looked at him for a long moment, then took his hand. We already are. News of Gavin's speech at the community center had spread beyond Queens. Media outlets picked it up across the country. People started calling it the Queen's Pledge. His vow to put human impact above everything else. Donations began pouring in. Not for Gavin but for the small clinics and schools he mentioned during his talk. Emails came from across the U.S., teachers in Detroit, doctors in El Paso, struggling moms in Chicago, asking for help, sharing their stories. Gavin formed a small team made up of locals, not executives, to manage the community projects. He called it Project Root. Because everything we build has to start from where we came from, he explained. Caroline joined as a community advisor. Her experience, compassion, and resilience became the backbone of the program. They opened a free weekend clinic on Northern Boulevard. A tech learning lab was set up inside a public library in Jackson Heights. And for the first time, people started to see real change that wasn't backed by politics or empty promises. But while things were changing on the outside, Gavin was still grappling with his past. One night, while sorting through old files in his laptop, he found a folder labeled 2014. Inside were pictures from a party in Brooklyn, the night he and Caroline had danced until morning. One photo showed her laughing, arms thrown around his neck, carefree and wild. He stared at it for a long time. So much time had been lost. So much left unsaid. He wasn't sure he deserved this second chance. But he was determined not to waste it. The next morning he went to Caroline with a small velvet box. This isn't a proposal, he said quickly. Not yet. I just wanted you to have this. She opened it and found a necklace, a simple gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant. Inside the heart were two tiny initials, M and C. For Mia and Caroline, he said. You two are my home now. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. You don't have to earn this, Gavin. You're already doing more than enough. He kissed her forehead gently. Outside, Mia was drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk, completely unaware that her world had just quietly healed a little more. For the first time in a long while, they weren't just surviving, they were building something real. And this time no one would walk away. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. It had been almost a year since Gavin learned the truth about Mia, since Caroline let him into their lives not as a wealthy stranger, but as the man he was always meant to be, a father. The seasons in Queens had changed slowly, with Mia growing taller and bolder by the day, her laughter now echoing through their apartment like music Gavin never knew he'd been missing. Caroline had begun to smile more often too, the shadows under her eyes from long years of struggle finally starting to fade. But with peace came new challenges, and Gavin knew that the real test of love wasn't in grand gestures, but in the quiet, day-to-day work of showing up. Every school pickup, every hospital follow-up appointment for Caroline's ongoing recovery, every bedtime story and dance recital. Those were now his responsibilities, not out of obligation but from a place of newfound purpose. In early spring, Caroline was offered a teaching role at a local school in Brooklyn, part-time at first, helping young kids with reading. It wasn't a glamorous job, but her heart lit up every time she came home with stories about the kids who reminded her of Mia. Gavin had stepped back even more from his company, now run by a board he trusted, focusing instead on Project Root, which had expanded to 10 cities. What began as a small community effort now had volunteers in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Oakland, and even a pilot branch opening in Dallas. It wasn't just philanthropy. It was Gavin's way of mending the mistakes he had made, of planting roots where he had once chased nothing but profits. One quiet Sunday afternoon, they sat on a bench at Bryant Park, watching Mia feed pigeons and tell them long stories only a 7-year-old could invent. Gavin reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn-out photo. It was one Caroline had given him, a picture of her holding baby Mia, taken at a hospital in Harlem. He had stared at this photo 100 times, tracing every inch of the baby's tiny features, silently grieving the years he'd missed. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" he asked, not looking at Caroline. She didn't answer right away. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and followed Mia with her eyes. "Sometimes," she finally said. "I wish you had known from the beginning. I wish I didn't have to be so afraid. But then I look at her now and I think maybe this was how it was supposed to happen. Maybe we all had to grow up before we could grow together." Gavin nodded, letting the truth of her words settle into his chest. He had built empires, made millions, and been celebrated in glossy magazines. But nothing compared to being the man Caroline trusted, the man Mia ran to with scraped knees and math homework. That night something changed. As they sat around the dinner table, Gavin slicing vegetables while Caroline stirred a pot of stew, Mia blurted out a question that caught them both off guard. "Are you guys going to get married or what?" she asked, casually sipping apple juice like she hadn't just dropped a bomb. Gavin nearly dropped the knife and Caroline choked on a laugh. "What makes you ask that, baby?" she replied. Mia shrugged. "All the other kids in my class have moms and dads who are married. Plus, you love each other, right? Isn't that what people do?" Gavin looked at Caroline, who looked back at him, her expression a mix of amusement and surprise. Mia's words were innocent, but they stirred something real. After dinner, while Mia was busy drawing on the living room floor, Gavin took Caroline's hand. "I didn't want to rush you," he said quietly. "But if you're ready, I'd marry you tomorrow." Caroline's eyes softened. "You don't need to prove anything, Gavin. You've already given me everything I ever wanted. You and Mia are my whole world now." He smiled. "Then let's make it official. Not for show. Just for us. For her." The wedding was small. Just a few friends, Mia in a pink dress she picked herself, and a simple ceremony in Central Park. No headlines, no photographers. Just the sounds of spring and the quiet promises of two people who had finally found their way back. Mia held both their hands as they exchanged vows, her eyes wide with joy. "This is the best day ever," she whispered. And it was. For all three of them. Afterward, they moved into a modest house near Flushing Meadows. Gavin planted a garden in the backyard, something he had never done before. Tomatoes, cucumbers, sunflowers. Mia helped him every weekend, insisting they name every plant. "This tomato is Lily," she said once. "She's shy but sweet." Gavin laughed. "Just like you used to be." The garden grew as did their life. Caroline returned to teaching full-time, eventually becoming a counselor for young mothers. Gavin continued to expand Project Root, though he never let it interfere with bedtime stories or school plays. And Mia, bright, curious Mia, thrived. She wanted to be a doctor now, like the ones who helped Mommy, she'd say. On a warm evening in August, the three of them sat outside watching fireflies. Gavin wrapped his arm around Caroline while Mia lay on a blanket beside them, whispering to the stars. "Do you think they can hear us?" she asked. Caroline smiled. "Who?" "The people we miss," Mia said. "Like Grandma. Maybe even the old you, the one who didn't know me yet." Gavin felt a lump in his throat. "I think they can," he said. "And I think they'd be really proud of us." There were no more secrets between them now. Just love. Real, imperfect, enduring love. Gavin had come into Mia's life as a stranger with a wallet full of power. He stayed as a father, a husband, and a man transformed not by money, but by the quiet miracle of family. If you've liked this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.